Welcome to a Neon Jazz interview with New York City drummer Matt Kane. During our interview, Matt talked about his start in Hannibal, Missouri, his years of playing in Kansas City at the Mutual Musicians Foundation, and with legends like Ida Macbeth and Sonny Kenner, along with his stops along the way in a storied jazz bio, and the one musician he would love to meet, as well as many more surprises. Dig it.
Hey, Joe, how you doing?
Hey, good, man. How are you?
Oh, things are great.
Excellent, man. Thank you very much for the short turnaround on this. I really appreciate you talking with us.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks
Excellent.
for thinking about me for it.
Oh, absolutely. I love Suit Up, man. I just played a track off your album last night on our show, and
Cool.
delighted to hear a Hannibal, Missouri native going to the bright lights of New York City, so I wanted to just kind of talk to you about your life and what's going on in New York.
Wow, thanks. Wow, it's Hannibal, yeah. It's quite a journey from Hannibal to New York, let me tell you.
Oh, my God. It sounds like it. So let's begin at the Alpha. You were born and raised in Hannibal, Missouri?
Yes.
And what was it like growing up in Hannibal that led you to love jazz?
Well, first of all, Hannibal was a place where you could dream. Wide open, you could just, sky was the limit. And I was fortunate to have just a brilliant band director by the name of Craig Buck. And he just steered me towards jazz. And we had a junior high jazz band and a high school jazz band. So by the age of 13, I was beginning to play in a big band, and that was really my training. The first, I guess, from age 13 to 18, all through school, I played in big band, and that was huge. You know, it's because the drummer has the hot seat there. You know, so. That was a big part of it. And Hannibal was small enough where, you weren't going to get beat down by a lot of naysayers or competition. Everybody was just very supportive, and they to go and do something big.
Yeah, cool, man. So what about your family? What were they like encouraging you to get into music?
The first drummer I ever saw was my cousin. His name is Mike Leonard. He ended up being the band director at Blue Springs, and then later on, I think he was at one of the Shawnee schools or somewhere down around there. I have to clarify that, but anyway, he majored in percussion. So the whole time I was growing up, he was quite a bit older than me by about 15 years, maybe even 20 years. But the whole time I was growing up, the family knew, well, if cousin Mike could major in percussion, well, then so can Matt, and that was huge. But maybe even more importantly than that was my father. He, when I was 6 years old and I first started getting interested in the drums, he brought home a Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa drum battle album.
Yeah.
And although I didn't understand, what they were doing, I listened to it a lot, and it was that was kind of the beginning. He brought home records all the time. I think he figured, he knew that I was going to listen to rock and roll. But he wanted me to be aware that there was a much classier music out there,
right,
which was jazz. He wasn't a jazz aficionado, anything like that, but he knew that, he wanted me to be aware of that. So, he'd bring home Mingus records, Miles. I think he would read downbeat and see the names and then go to the record store and just buy them without even knowing who they were.
Very cool. Well,
yeah.
Well, that's the Bible, man. I mean, if you're going to go off anything, that's where you'd go off of.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Kansas City. We're based in Kansas City. You have some big names you learned under: Laurie Tucker, Ida Macbeth, Mike Metheny, Sonny Kenner, McFadden Brothers, Ahmad, and Karrin Allyson. What was it like to get your teeth cut prior to going to New York City with musicians of that caliber and the Kansas City scene?
It was, it was kind of like trying to really think of the best way to put it. A lot of the experience, like I came in on the blues. That was something I was familiar with. So when I first started playing with Laurie, that's where I learned a lot about the blues and R&B. And then later I played with Ida, and that was kind of the next level of that. Ida was working very steady at the time, and I was going to UMKC, and the probably the key part of it all though was the foundation, the Mutual Musicians Foundation. That was a place where the first time I went there they ran me off, and I didn't go back until I was really confident about what I was doing, and just being accepted into the fold at the foundation, and to go there and sit in and play till 8 a.m. On Saturday nights was huge. And it just just climbing. I hate to call it climbing the ladder, but I always wanted to play with the best musicians possible. I mean, that's the only way to improve, is to surround yourself with people that are on your level or above. And so I wanted to play with the Bob Bowmans and the Ahmad Aladdins and the Joe Cartwrights and all those the top tier players. And I just kind of worked my way into that position, kind of tenaciously. The way I got to play with Aladdin was I just called him up and just told him I want to be in your band. I want to play with you. And and he said, be at the foundation on Tuesday at 3:00. So, and that's kind of how it that started. A lot of those opportunities came through my drum teacher, Todd Strait, who was my absolute drum idol for my formative years in Kansas City. I mean, he, making the jump from Hannibal to Kansas City was a very daunting task. It was tough. I mean, I had a lot of bad habits ingrained. I played very loud, and I had been, just because I didn't have a drum teacher in Hannibal. So Todd Strait was kind of, I mean, he helped me understand, just how to play the drums. And so when I started getting solid enough, he started calling me to sub for him with Karrin, with Mike Metheny or Gary Civils, with interstring. Mm-hmm. I was one of the few drummers that they would call to play with interstring, which was huge for me. The first time I played with interstring was like the top of the top, and that was the same way with the Sons of Brazil. I would sub for Doug Allwater, and playing with Karrin, subbing for Todd, and she was very demanding. She expected world-class level, playing. So, and then, in my opinion, the really the top of the top was being in Aladdin's band, because, I mean, I love all the other musicians in town, but Aladdin was about something greater, in my opinion. His compositions, he was in my opinion, he was one of the few people in town, if maybe the only, that was doing original material, that had one foot firmly rooted in the Kansas City jazz tradition of the blues and the modern blues, and then the other foot in the future.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I didn't want to play. I felt that I would grow the most playing original music, and I felt that my personality came out the most playing original music. And I just had such great respect for Aladdin that that was the top right there for me, because he didn't just go out and play for money. It was not about money for Aladdin. It was about it was spiritual. There was no joking around on the bandstand. There was no bullshit. If you showed up in jeans, you weren't allowed on the bandstand. It was dignified. You were treated like a grown man, and that was huge. That was huge. I could go on all day about that. But yeah, that's kind of what it was like. It was just kind of making your way through the scene, trying to find just ways to surround yourself with, the players that you were gonna improve the most.
It's interesting. I just read an article in the Kansas City Star on Aladdin after he passed his widow, and it talked about the love that they had, and it was a totally inspiring article, and I think it really spoke to the kind of character that he had and the kind of musician and individual he was. So it's interesting you bring him up so sparklingly, because this article was really moving, and I actually hadn't had him on the show before, and I grabbed a track and put it on there and spoke about him, and it was kind of cool. So
yeah, he's surprisingly, I think probably because he wasn't out and about playing a lot around Kansas City as much as he could have, he was maybe a little bit slept on.
Yeah.
And they always say that when a person passes away, well, that's when we all discover them, but I think the musicians in town really knew it, and Aladdin wasn't the guy that as a person, he said very few words, sometimes if any. He didn't have to speak much, and it was the same way with his playing. He wasn't the guy that was going to barrage you with notes. He wasn't going to play, 20 choruses. He said what he wanted to say, and I think, you didn't go hear Aladdin's band if you wanted to hear technical, stunning virtuosity. It was more of a spiritual thing, in my opinion, and he was so dedicated to not just jazz, but Kansas City jazz. That meant a lot to him, and one story that really sums it up for me is we did a record called Time Through the Ages in 1995 or 6. I think it was 96. And we did a take, the very first take of the session. And I was overplaying. Everybody was overplaying, except him, of course. Here we were, a bunch of young guys, just maybe a third his age. And we were probably in our minds thinking, oh, we're going to, this is our first record. We're going to kick ass,
Yeah.
And anyway, after the take, he stopped the band and he just said, terrible. He said, the thing he said that really stuck with me, he said, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for you. And it went over my head at the time. But now that I'm, 42 and I lead my own band and I teach, not so much for money, but for a more spiritual purpose, that was the spiritual intent behind Aladdin as a person. He knew the music didn't belong to him, and he knew that it was greater than all of us. So he felt an obligation to further it, and to do that through us, which was incredibly selfless. Every other band in town, it was, get the best player you can. and a player that can really wow people, and and it was more of that vibe, in my opinion, with many bands, not everyone, but and let's go out and play as many gigs as we can and make as much money as we can, and almost as if to let's pimp ourselves,
Yeah, sure.
And Aladdin was really, I mean, when he said that, he's like, I'm doing this for you. This isn't for me. It that says it all.
Yeah.
It
Absolutely.
really does. It really, really does. And the older I get and more experienced I get, jazz is I'm sorry, but you just can't teach it in schools. It's learned at places like the Foundation. And that really, I consider that Foundation. And Aladdin was a big champion of the Foundation. That's where Bird and Diz had met. That's where all the history had happened.
Yeah.
And even deeper on a racial level, they could have kept it the Black Musicians Union, but they didn't.
Yeah.
They broke down the barrier and called it the Mutual Musicians Foundation. And people told me, "Oh man, Aladdin's not going to hire you, man. You got to be black." And I heard that from a lot of people. And before I called him, and I was like, "Nah, I'm going to try anyway." And he wasn't about that. And there was, believe me, I'm sure he took some shit for hiring a white drummer.
Yeah.
Sure. But that just, I mean, that just goes to show he could have hired a lot of other people.
Yeah.
But so that's what he was really about, and it's just, now that I'm older, I wish I would have seen it then. I was just 25 years old and wanting to go out and whip the world and whatnot, but
Yeah.
And the last time I saw him was in 2004. I was in town just playing a short gig at the Blue Room, and he showed up, which was rare for Aladdin to go out to someone else's gig. He was kind of a stay-at-home, and because he didn't have wheels, he didn't drive.
Yeah.
So, and I was really thinking about leaving New York. 9/11, I had witnessed it firsthand. I was standing on the street when those towers came down, and the music scene just kind of doubled over and didn't really ever straighten back up again. And I was thinking about leaving New York, and I told Aladdin this, and he just said, he said, "You're doing the right thing." He said, you might not know it now, but just keep doing what you're doing. And I took that to mean that it's a lifelong study. We all go through periods where maybe we're not playing what we want to be playing or whatever, but you just keep going. So I stayed, and I'm glad I did.
That's the perfect segue. When you think about the jazz trajectory or the great jazz story, Midwest to Kansas City to New York, what's it like to live that kind of jazz dream?
You constantly must define the why. Constantly. Mm-hmm. When you're on the subway with your little travel kit and it's 110 degrees down there and you're sweating and you have to lug your drum set on a cart up and down the subway stairs because you can't afford a cab. Well, because a cab won't pick you up because they see you with all that shit and they just keep on going.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you're in the middle of that and you're lugging your drums up the subway stairs and your arms are hurting and, moments like that, you have to really dig deep and define the why. And the why is, I came to New York to be around all the best players in the world, and it's always, ever since I was just a little kid, like 12 years old, the question was, how can I get better? And just that one question carried me to Kansas City. And, man, you know, when I got to Kansas City, it was like, oh, my God, how am I going to do this? And then later on, when I got to New York, it was like, oh, my God, like, it just really, you're forced to consider that sort of thing almost on a daily basis out here. Traffic jams, rudeness, just super high cost of living, logistics. Being a drummer out here it's just, it's a lot of tenacity, and it continues to be. That's the crazy thing. I mean, there are guys that are legends out here in their 50s and 60s, and you talk to them, and they're like, yeah, I should really be out on the scene hanging out. I'm not really working enough. And you're like, holy shit, you're a legend, and you're 60 years old, and you're saying this? It's crazy. It really is. And sometimes I'm on a $100 gig with, legends like Steve Laspina and Vic Juris, and you're doing like a $100 hit somewhere with them, and you're just sitting here like, wow. And it keeps it's got to be for the music,
Yeah.
Period. And those moments when it's so beautiful and the music is coming through you and people are spiritually uplifted, those are the moments that you might have one of those moments every couple of months. Yeah. Maybe you might not even have it once every 6 months. And then somehow that'll sustain you until the next great moment. And, it almost makes it more difficult because when you have one of those great moments, well, then you want to top that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of that, the payoff of going to New York is that you've got to perform with people like Norah Jones, Randy Brecker, and you were just saying Vic Juris and some others. What's it like to be around that caliber of musician on a regular basis? That's just where you're at. What's it like to perform with people like that?
You get all nervous at first, and then when you look them in the eye, you realize, well, they're just like you. One thing I have really had to learn out here is that I never put anybody above me in a personal sense. If there's a giant storm and the lights go out and my lights go out, well, theirs are out too. Or, you know what I mean? They got to take their pants down to use the toilet just like me.
Yeah.
So I keep that firmly in mind, But when the music starts, you know where that caliber, you feel it. You feel that caliber, being in the studio with Brecker a couple of months ago, he was totally cool. Yeah, man, we talked the tune down. The take starts, and it's like driving a really nice car.
Yeah.
And when you touch that gas, you know where all that extra octane is coming from. Gosh, Vic Juris is just, some of these people are just such great. They compose as they play, and it just really makes it easy, and I could play any kind of music. Nora's more on like the country pop jazz kind of tip, and Vic is like on this like modern jazz Star Trek plane, and but no matter what it is, if it's really good, you just feel it immediately when you play with somebody like that. You feel that quality come through, and everything they do is, especially somebody I have to mention, Dave Stryker. I started working with him in my band, and when he agreed to play with me, I was like, wow, okay, cool. And after the first gig, he was like, yeah, man, how come you haven't called me sooner? And listening to Dave is one thing, but playing with him, then you start to realize the depth of the man's talent and experience, and just his, he came out here from Omaha, so he's got that tenacity. I think those of us who came out here from somewhere else and we weren't jazz prodigies to begin with,
Yeah.
We've had to fight and scratch for everything
Yeah.
that we've got. And not that the prodigies didn't, but Hannibal, Missouri was no jazz mecca, and coming up from there to New York was just a long, you're just in it for the, you're just a big long, 15 round heavyweight fight, it seems sometimes. And Dave, when he hits it and you're playing with him, you just feel this power of focus and concentration and experience, and he's amazing. He's truly amazing. And it's one thing to hear somebody from the audience, but when you actually play with them, it's like, wow, okay, now I know. And Dave produced the CD as well, and I learned so much from Dave in the 4 hours that it took to record that record.
Yeah. Awesome. That's cool.
My God, I mean, this is a man that's just, when you're on the road with Stanley Turrentine like he was for 10 years, you learn, and Dave was one of the few guys that really worked. I think with Jack McDuff, he worked that chillin' circuit and all those small places. So Dave can play a house like almost like nobody I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, the punishment has to fit the crime, and this man, he can look at a room and size it up from moment to moment and know what to play, what tune to call, how to pace his solo, how to even stand. I mean, he could stand a certain way and people respond. It's crazy, man. I've never seen anything like it. So Dave Stryker is just truly. I mean, I don't think he gets enough credit on a international level. I think he's starting to, but he's just, man, that guy is just, he's an ironclad made man of jazz guitar.
Right on.
It's just, and the thing I like about Dave too, me being from Missouri and Kansas City and the blues, is kind of a common thread there too. He's totally steeped in the blues, but he'll dip outside and play some pretty hellacious modern harmony too. That he's just got a full entire grasp on what he's doing and
That's
why
cool.
he's doing it.
That's very cool. So let's say someone sits down and reads the liner notes for a compilation album of yours, and you have to describe your projects and kind of your lineage to where you are now. How would you sum that up in a couple paragraphs to let somebody know where you've started and where you've come to now as far as projects are concerned?
I think as far as all the, if somebody were to put together a compilation of my career, recorded works and the gigs I've been on and all that, you would hear in the early days, you would hear somebody that has a lot of fire, but maybe occasionally gets burned.
Yeah.
or maybe is a little too strong. When I played with the McFadden Brothers, Lonnie McFadden said he hired me because he liked my fire, and that was kind of my thing in Kansas City. Oh man, we like that fire, and so and I didn't really realize it at the time, and it's taken me a long time to realize this now, but I have a very powerful emotional response to music and to other players, especially when I'm playing. Like, when I hear something that I really like, I have a real power. I'm not one of these cerebral cats that can stay, level-headed. Like, it's taken me a long time to reel it in. So the progression has been, in the early 90s, mid-90s, you heard this really emotional, fiery player that was a bit loose and maybe a little, a little out of control, but really down for the cause. And as I've gotten older and I've gotten more in control of my life, and things like alcohol and that, which I've had to fight through, especially once I got through that, as I've gained control of myself, I've gained control of my emotions to a certain extent, and now people are hearing the refined Matt. I think now, especially with the Suit Up record, a lot of comments I've heard from folks that knew me in Kansas City are like, okay, this is what we knew you could be 15 years ago.
Sure.
And all the New York experience and the going through trials and tribulations, sticking with it until I finally evened out as a man. I got married and accepted responsibility for myself. You would hear in a compilation, you'd hear somebody that finally got over that hump. Yeah. And got themselves under control. And probably another common thread would be, a lot of the music I've played, jazz, very heavily influenced by Brazilian music and Brazilian musicians. In fact, that's almost all I played from 2002 to 2007 was just Brazilian gigs and crazy enough, hip-hop gigs. And the one common thread would just be I've always, as I've gotten more control, my groove and my ability to find the least common denominator and the simplicity in something, has grown, especially through hip hop. Crazy enough, and Brazilian music. I didn't need to fill a lot in those musics, and it really helped me realize the importance of one small variation in a groove. And there's a type of freedom through discipline.
Yeah.
And to lay in a pocket, especially when you've got some chops and you've got a little something that you think you want to prove, to lay in a pocket is a real discipline if that's not how you were raised, or if that's not your forte, and so everything just kind of has grown more focused and purposeful.
Sure.
Really. Yeah. There's a real power in defining your why and knowing your purpose. And my purpose over the years, one of the things I like most is seeing people happy.
Yeah.
I don't like to play a jazz gig and see 3 people in the audience and have them tuned out. And I don't particularly like what I call math jazz, which is like all these odd time signatures just coming at you. I mean, that might be cool here and there, or that might, but that seems to be kind of one of the current jazz trends that I'm good with it to a certain extent, and my hat's off to. I mean, I love odd time signatures, but I think ultimately you are playing for yourself, and you want to please your musical standards, but at the same time you want to heal people and make them feel good. And for me, the groove and the pocket and the feeling of the music is really the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I've learned from Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes and Mel Lewis and all my heroes. It's the feeling of the music. You could be a stellar player and everything could be perfectly aligned. You know, there's some phenomenal drummers out there who are just shitty musicians.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to put it bluntly, I mean, there really are. Or just, I won't say shitty musicians, but like, you know, they're great at playing the drums, but maybe not so great at making music.
Right.
And that goes for every instrument, you know, so that would kind of be the trajectory, you know, and kind of the master of that is Pat Metheny, who is, you know, I always mention him because whenever I go to see him play, I see a guy who has like the highest musical standard in the world, and you know, he obviously goes and his goal is to meet his musical standard first, but by meeting that standard, he's going to make everyone else happy too.
Yeah.
You know, and because we all have heard Pat's taken some pretty huge chances on records to stay true to his musical aesthetic and what he feels this, you know, he wants to explore. But I mean, he's got the biggest fan base of any jazz musician in the world, probably.
Yeah.
So there's like, that fascinates me. People liking what you're doing and smiling and getting off on it and feeling good and being healed and leaving the show with a real experience, but yet at the same time, the musician, you know, being able to satisfy their musical standards and the truth that they're going for. You know, I mean, yeah, you can please people, but you know, but can you do it without compromising, you know, what you believe in?
Absolutely. So, speaking of greatness and compromise, let's jump into a jazz time machine here. Let's go back in time. If you could meet one jazz musician from any era, who would it be and why?
Boy. It would have to be John Coltrane.
Cool.
And the reason being is because he was transcendent of music in a way. I mean, as far as meeting him, I don't know what I would say or what I would ask, but I think I would give anything to experience, you know, Coltrane's group with Elvin Jones, who I did get to meet and shake his hand and thank him. But I you know, Coltrane's quartet of the 60s, especially the album Love Supreme, you know, Coltrane was maybe one of the few people, I think Coltrane and Horace Silver touched on this with some of his records too, some of his later, his kind of mid-period records in the 70s. But Coltrane in particular was the, I think, one of the few musicians to outwardly embrace making a spiritual statement with his music in a way that, because he didn't have lyrics, but yet the way he conveyed his sentiments and his purpose, in particular on the Love Supreme album. To me, that's one of the ultimate things one can do with their music, is to uplift humanity, and Coltrane did that.
Yeah.
And Love Supreme's not an album that I can put on while I'm cleaning the house. It's not any kind of light listening experience. You know, I have to be ready for it. I have to, you know, it's like it's like a prayer to me. In fact, literally, it's a prayer. He plays, you know, the poem on the inside of Love Supreme. It's a prayer. If you open the liner notes, there's a prayer, and he actually put that on the music stand in front of him and played it, you know, syllable for syllable, on the record, and you know, that just blows me away. To me, that's in particular after 9/11, I was really looking for a way to say something in my music, and I was going through a real tough time, and I was kind of in the hip hop realm, and I wrote a lot of lyrics and tunes, and I just really wanted to say something about everything that was happening, and I think Coltrane, in his time, I mean, think of what was happening in 1965.
Yeah.
Or, people being burned in churches and that sort of thing. And he, during that era, he came right out and addressed it, through the music.
Yeah.
And that's not something you see often. Sometimes people say, oh, you shouldn't make political statements with music, or you shouldn't, you got to be careful with that. You can alienate people or whatever. But I mean, look at like, to me, two albums that are kind of parallel are like Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, and Love Supreme.
Yeah.
I mean, because these are people that came right out and kind of made a plea to the world in a way. So yeah, Coltrane would be it for me.
Right on. So this interview, there was a lot of questions I had in between that you've answered here and there, and I'm getting right down to the end of the interview. And my last question, to kind of get to know who you are, what's the last song or album you listened to before our interview?
The last album was an album. Last night it was. It's called Midnight Express by Jimmy Smith. That was the last album I was listening to. I haven't heard any music yet today, so
cool.
That was last night. Midnight Express with Jimmy Smith, and right, mainly because I'm doing my research on organ drummers, and it's a whole realm that I kind of slept on for years, and there's just some amazing drummers in that realm, and I'm just fascinated by simplicity. Yeah. And organ drumming is the peak of jazz drumming simplicity, where one small change in the groove can make a huge difference, or a switch to a certain part of the cymbal can change the thing, or and the drummer's name is Donald Bailey on that record. Mm-hmm. He's played some fascinating beats, and so I'm doing my homework, and also I just love organ. The more I listen to it, and the more I play with organ players, that's a real special kind of rhythm section relationship, an organ player and a drummer.
Yeah.
it's been done by many different combinations of cats, and Larry Young and Elvin Jones, and Jack McDuff and Joe Dukes and Don Patterson and Billy James. And I'm just now learning about this whole world. Because when I was coming up in the 80s, man, it was, those records just weren't out there in Hannibal, or even in Kansas City for that matter, So I didn't really know. But there's some really good organ players in Kansas City, though. Everett Devan, and he used to work with a great drummer named Marvin Jones, I think was his name. But at the time, I didn't really appreciate that like I do now.
Yeah.
So just and Jimmy Smith, my God, I mean, I got to see Jimmy Smith once in like the late '90s. And just a real feisty character, man, and the organ is it's a wild beast. It's just a phenomenal instrument. I mean, really something. So I'm doing my research and enjoying it. So that's what was spinning in the car. Midnight Express.
Very cool. Well, man,
Yeah.
no, go ahead.
I can't say. I think that was. Oh, and I was listening to it on the way home from a concert. I went to hear the Freddie Hendrix Quintet last night.
Cool.
That was still kind of in my ears. Too. Great quintet with Cecil Brooks III on drums.
Sweet.
Just a phenomenal drummer. Really a good guy. Powerful drummer too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a fun night last night.
Right on. Man, Matt, this was wonderful, a refreshing interview. I really appreciate you taking your time out.
My pleasure.
Thanks again, Matt.
Oh, Joe, hey, thank you, brother, man. I really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely, man. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players doing that jazz these days around the world and in Kansas City. And thanks to Matt for his time and insight into his craft. It was a good one. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or you can visit all things Neon Jazz at theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.